In 1590, an English ship arrived at a small island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. His captain was returning to check on a colony he had helped found 3 years earlier. 117 men, women, and children who had sailed from England to build a permanent settlement in the New World. When he landed, the colony was gone. Not destroyed, not burned to the ground, not attacked in any way that left obvious evidence. Gone. The buildings had been dismantled. Possessions were left behind. There were no bodies, no graves, no signs of violence. The only clue, 3 letters carved into a wooden post at the entrance to the settlement. CRO, and on a nearby tree, a single word. CROATOAN. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody has agreed on what happened since. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, and after 436 years, it remains one of the oldest unsolved mysteries in American history. To understand why 117 people disappeared, you first need to understand why 117 people were there in the first place. The year is 1584. England is watching Spain dominate the New World with a growing sense of alarm. Spain had been colonizing the Americas for nearly a century, extracting enormous quantities of silver and gold, establishing settlements, building an empire. England had done almost nothing. Queen Elizabeth I had granted a handful of explorers the right to try, but no permanent English settlement existed anywhere in North America. That changed when a man named Walter Raleigh received a royal charter to establish an English colony in a region he called Virginia, named for Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. Raleigh sent an expedition in 1584 to scout the coast. They returned with a favorable report and, notably, 2 Native American men named Manteo and Wanchese, who were brought back to England, introduced to the court, and used as proof that the new land was friendly and welcoming. In 1585, Raleigh sent the first proper colony, 108 men, no women, to Roanoke Island, a narrow strip of land between the Outer Banks and the mainland. It was chosen for its defensible position, sheltered from Spanish ships. That first colony failed within a year. Relations with the local Algonquin tribes broke down badly. The English, running short of food, had burned a native village in retaliation for a stolen silver cup. When Francis Drake arrived in 1586 on his way home from raiding Spanish ports, the colonists were exhausted, hungry, and demoralized. They all went home. Raleigh should have stopped there. He didn't. In 1587, he sent a second attempt, a larger, more serious expedition. 117 people this time, including 17 women and 9 children. This wasn't just a military outpost or a scouting mission. These were families. This was meant to be permanent. The governor appointed to lead this colony was a man named John White, an artist and surveyor who had been on the earlier 1585 expedition and knew the land. On 22nd July 1587, they landed on Roanoke Island. Within days, it was clear things were already going wrong. The colonists arrived to find the settlement from the previous expedition in a state of ruin. The buildings were overgrown. The fort had been partially dismantled, and one of the 15 men who had been left behind to maintain the site was found dead, a skeleton near the shore. The others had vanished. No explanation was ever given. Relations with the local tribes were immediately tense. The Roanoke people, who had suffered during the first colony, were hostile. Other tribes, the CROATOAN, who lived on a nearby island, were more friendly, largely because of the presence of Manteo, the Native American man who had been brought to England and was now returning as a liaison. White formally allied with the CROATOAN and was given permission to settle on their land if needed. But Roanoke Island was where the colony was, and Roanoke Island was where they stayed. On August 18, 1587, a child was born in the colony. Her name was Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Her mother was Eleanor White, the governor's daughter. Her father was Ananias Dare. It should have been a moment of optimism. Instead, within days, White was being pressured by the colonists to sail back to England himself. They were desperately short of supplies. The 1587 expedition had been poorly equipped. They needed food, medicine, tools, things they didn't have and couldn't get on their own. White resisted. He didn't want to leave his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, the colony he was responsible for. But the colonists insisted. He was the governor. He had the connections in England. He was the only person who could secure the resources they needed. On the 27th of August, 1587, John White sailed back to England. He fully intended to return within a few months. He would not see the colony again for 3 years. What happened over the next 3 years was not White's fault, but it was catastrophic for the people he left behind. White arrived back in England in November 1587 and immediately began pushing for a resupply mission. He had supplies organized, ships arranged, a departure date set. Then the Spanish Armada came. In 1588, Spain launched its famous attempted invasion of England, a fleet of 130 ships. England went into emergency footing. Queen Elizabeth issued a proclamation forbidding any ships from leaving English ports. Every vessel was needed for the defense of the country. White managed to get 2 small pinnaces released, too small to carry meaningful supplies, but enough to attempt a crossing. Those ships never made it. Their captains decided to try their luck raiding Spanish ships for profit on the way. They were intercepted, robbed, and barely made it back to England. The Armada was defeated in July 1588. England celebrated, and then spent the next 2 years in financial recovery. White lobbied continuously. He wrote letters. He appealed to Raleigh. He appealed to merchants. Nobody would fund a Roanoke resupply mission. The economics were against it. The war had drained resources, and frankly, nobody was certain the colony was even still alive. Finally, in 1590, 3 full years after he had left, White secured passage back to Roanoke on a privateering expedition. The ship's primary purpose was to raid Spanish ships. Roanoke was a side trip, barely tolerated by the captain. They arrived at Roanoke Island on the 18th of August, 1590, the 3rd birthday of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, if she had survived. She had not survived. Nobody had. White described the approach to the island in his journal. As the ship drew close, the men fired a signal gun and played English tunes on a trumpet, the agreed signal to let the colonists know that friendly ships had arrived. No response. They landed the following morning and made their way to the settlement. What they found was not what White had feared. He had feared destruction, burnt buildings, signs of attack, bodies. Instead, he found an orderly abandonment. The outer palisade, the defensive fence around the settlement, was intact. The houses had been taken down, not burned. The heavy furniture and iron equipment had been carefully buried, presumably to be retrieved later. The settlement was silent, empty, completely cleared of people. At the entrance to the palisade, carved into a post, were 3 letters, C-R-O, and on a nearby tree, in clear capital letters, 1 word, CROATOAN. White had left specific instructions before his departure 3 years earlier. If the colonists were forced to abandon the settlement, they were to carve their destination into a tree. If they were leaving under distress, if something had gone wrong, they were to carve a Maltese cross alongside the name. There was no cross. This, White wrote in his journal, gave him great hope. The word CROATOAN referred to the island to the south where their allies, the CROATOAN people, and Manteo lived. The absence of the distress symbol suggested they had left voluntarily in an organized fashion. He was certain he was about to find them. He never did. A fierce storm blew in before the expedition could reach CROATOAN Island. The captain, whose priority was his privateering mission, refused to wait it out. The ships were low on fresh water. 3 anchors had already been lost in the storm. They turned around and sailed back to England. White never returned to America. He died around 1593, having spent the last years of his life trying and failing to secure another resupply expedition. He never learned what happened to his daughter. He never learned what happened to his granddaughter. Nobody did. 4 centuries of investigation have produced several serious theories. Here is what the evidence actually supports, and where it runs out. Theory 1. They went to CROATOAN Island. This is the most straightforward reading of the evidence. The colonists, facing starvation, moved south to live with their CROATOAN allies, who had been friendly throughout. Manteo, their liaison, had family there. Supporting this, the wort carved at the site, the absence of the distress cross, and the fact that later expeditions to the Outer Banks, notably one led by Samuel Mace in 1602, reported hearing rumors from native tribes of people matching English descriptions living in the interior. The problem, nobody ever found them. CROATOAN Island was searched multiple times in subsequent decades. No evidence of a European settlement was found. Theory 2. They integrated into a native tribe. This theory, now taken seriously by historians, holds that the colonists didn't stay together as a distinct group, but dispersed, joining various Algonquin communities in the region. Intermarriage would explain why no European settlement was ever found, while also explaining why later accounts from colonists in Jamestown, founded in 1607, just 20 years later, described interior tribes with gray eyes, European features, and knowledge of metal tools. John Smith, of Jamestown, heard accounts of a settlement to the south where 4 men, 2 boys, and a young woman with fair hair had survived among native people. He never investigated. Supporting archaeological evidence, DNA studies are ongoing, and some families in the Outer Banks region carry genetic markers consistent with 16th century European ancestry alongside Native American ancestry. In 2012, a team from the First Colony Foundation discovered a small patch on a 1585 map, hidden under a paper patch, that showed the location of a fort symbol in the interior, consistent with where some historians believe the colonists may have moved. Theory 3. They were killed. The Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful alliance of Algonquin tribes that dominated the region, reportedly told Jamestown colonists that they had destroyed a settlement of people who had been living with the Chesapeake tribe. Chief Powhatan allegedly showed metal tools he claimed to have taken from them. This account, if accurate, would suggest the colonists, or some portion of them, survived for 20 years after White's departure, long enough to be caught up in tribal warfare they had nothing to do with. It would also mean some were killed. Not all. But Powhatan had reasons to lie, reasons to exaggerate, and reasons to claim military victories he hadn't won. Here is what we can say with reasonable confidence. The colonists did not die where they were. The settlement was abandoned deliberately and in order. The word CROATOAN was left as a message, not as a warning. They went somewhere. Some of them may have survived for years, possibly decades. But we have never found them. Not their graves, not their settlement, not a single confirmed physical trace. 117 people, including children, including a 3-year-old girl named Virginia Dare, walked into the American interior in the late 1580s and ceased to exist in the historical record. The archaeology continues. The DNA studies continue. The map analysis continues. And the question that John White spent the last years of his life asking remains, 4 centuries later, completely open. Where did they go? Next week, we're looking at a book written in an unknown language, with an unknown alphabet, with illustrations that don't match any known planet or star system, that has defeated every codebreaker, linguist, and cryptographer who has ever tried to read it. If you watched this far, subscribe. New file every week.